Jerome, thanks so much for joining us inside the Ice House.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So 2025 marks 60 years of UTI's evolution from a trade school to a leader in workforce solutions. When you reflect just on 6 decades of what UTI has become, of preparing students for successful careers, what stands out most to you? What comes to mind?
No, that's a great question. And, the Institute did start with one campus in Phoenix 60 years ago, 5 kids. And they were under a mission of, listen, there's a lot of cars in this country that need to be fixed. Let's fix cars. And I think the piece that really followed through all 60 years was dedication to quality, dedication to having a student that graduates work ready right out of the gates. Things evolved over time with industry alliances and things along those lines. But at the very beginning, they said, we're going to have a very high quality product. Our students are going to be sought after. And that's something that they've been able to do all the way through these decades.
So, Jerome, you became CEO in 2019 after serving as COO for a few years before that. So you really got a whole picture on the UTI brand. But when you took over this leadership position, overseeing the company, how have you focused on balancing what UTI was, that 5-person classroom focused on automotive, with the need to modernize, innovate, and adapt to everything that these trades and that the healthcare industry brings today?
That's unyielding focus on quality permeates everything that we've done. And so even if we think about our growth, our diversification, our optimization strategies, we do it all in the light of staying focused on outcomes. If students don't get great jobs, we don't succeed. They succeed, we succeed. And so once you dedicate yourself to that underlying notion that we're never going to yield on quality, we're never going to yield on marketability, we're not going to yield, that stands by you in anything you do. It actually dictates how fast we move. We could build many more than 2 campuses a year. The supply and demand curve is so far out of whack that we could build twice as many campuses and still not fill the demand for skilled workers in America. But we don't. And we don't because we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves in terms of quality. Hiring, training, making sure that the curriculum is right, making sure that the technology is right. All of that guides what we do as we've been growing over these past 5 years.
And so as we look back to those initial days of your time as a CEO, what were just when you're sitting in your office, first few months, first few weeks, your initial impressions of the challenges that were facing UTI? And at the same time, what were your impressions on the opportunities for growth and just how successful the company overall could be?
Yeah. So I'll answer in reverse. Opportunities is actually what brought me to UTI, is that if you have over 6,000 employer partners, these are people who have registered to get access to your end product, which is a qualified student. You've got 35 OEM partners, Mercedes, Ford, GM, Harley Davidson, Peterbilt, all the greatest brands in the world. And you've got a reputation for this high quality output. Those three things together are really the fuel that I was using at that time to be able to say, listen, we need to unlock the fullest potential of this school. The school was really in neutral at the time, wasn't trying to grow, wasn't really addressing the skills gap that's out there, wasn't really addressing this notion of this supply and demand curve issue where there's 4 jobs for every graduate. And so, at that time, what we were really thinking was, let's put a plan together that can unlock the fullest potential, given that we have these assets that we can build upon.
So earlier this year, I spoke with Donald Allen, the CEO of Stanley Black & Decker, and we talked a lot about the urgent need for skilled workers, which you've obviously mentioned during our conversation. And these workers are needed in obviously many of the same fields that UTI trains their students in. A McKinsey study mentioned 584,000 jobs. That's how big the workforce deficit is in the trades. At least it was in 2024. And you can only imagine that it's continuing to grow. So how do you interpret the scale of this challenge? And what are the ramifications if that number is not decreased, if that gap continues to grow and instead is not minimized? what could be the potential consequences for everyone else if the workforce isn't there to fill these trades and healthcare positions?
I think it's also important because UTI is actually both in transportation, skilled trades, and energy and healthcare. The healthcare field is larger and the demand is even greater, right? We talk about 4 jobs for every graduate in the transportation, trades, and energy. It's 5 to 10 jobs for every graduate on the healthcare side. And so the ramifications are different on either side. The ramifications on the UTI side of the equation are, just think of it practically. How long do you have to wait to get your car fixed? Right? How long are you waiting in line? An open bay at a car dealership costs them a lot of money, but costs you the inconvenience of waiting days, if not weeks, to get your car fixed. We're talking about onshoring going on in the U.S. We're not going to build ships in China anymore. We're not going to build fighter jets overseas. Who's going to build those? Yeah. We train welders, electricians, HVAC techs, all of those people who would be part of that growth. Without that, frankly, we don't have an opportunity to build, right? And then there's some of the critical pieces of it, like during COVID, right? The car dealerships shut down their retail for a while, and that's one of the things that moved car dealerships online at that point of view. They didn't close their service areas, right? Because cars had to stay on the road. Groceries had to be delivered and diesel trucks and things along those lines, and it plays a critical role in the infrastructure. On the healthcare side, it's the need is dire, and it's more people will get sick, more people will die if there's not the right people that are there to help them, and we take that very seriously. And I said the skills gap is there and growing. To your point with the CEO of Black & Decker, he's absolutely right, and growing, especially with the aging demographic of people retiring out. With everything we're going to do over the next 5 years, and we've laid out our next 5-year North Star plan. We're still not going to make a scratch in the problem. And so we need more participation. We need the government to participate with community colleges and high schools and middle schools and things along those lines. That's the stuff that's going to start attacking that gap.
And why do you think that gap exists? Is it a retirement issue, as you just mentioned, right? Aging out of whether it be healthcare or even the skills trade? Is it a perception issue? Right? Why do you think that we have these really substantial and potentially devastating gaps in the workforce, both in obviously the skilled trade and the healthcare industry?
Well, focusing on the skilled trade, I think is very much a cultural issue, right? I think that there are 25,000 high schools, 25 million high school students in the United States. We've got about 153 recruiters that are in the high schools talking to people. There are high schools that won't let us in. Yeah. Right? Why? Because they define themselves about what 4-year schools that their students, their graduates will go to. Right? And I think culturally over the 70s and 80s, there was this redefinition of both high schools and junior colleges or community colleges as feeders for a 4-year education, and that everybody needed a 4-year education. I have a 4-year education. I assume you have a 4-year education.
As well, yep.
That's fantastic, but not everybody does. Some 40% of the students that graduate from high school don't go on. Going right out into the workforce, we don't believe is in their best interest. Yeah. Right. And so one of the things people ask us about is who's your biggest competitors? Right. Is it the community colleges? Is it the other trade schools in the country or the other? No. Our biggest competitor is a parent. What they want their child to do after high school, right? Frankly, not a lot of parents want to be at a cocktail party saying their kid's a welder, right? And we need to break down those stereotypes, understand that these are great jobs with great pay and great stability. And there need to be more schools like ours out there that offer the opportunity for people to do this.
So, Jerome, is that half the battle? Not only convincing students to come to UTI to pursue careers in the trades and healthcare, but also convincing their parents too?
Yeah, it's the biggest battle by far. Obviously, money is a big deal here, right? People are making a sizable investment in their future here in order to pursue this. Usually, these families are people who their parents didn't go to college, and this child probably was not the best student. Right. And so making the investment in doing this is a big deal to them. But I think more importantly is that that sort of parental cultural barrier about I want my kid to go to a 4-year school is by and large the largest piece of the conversation. And I'll give you an example of how this works is we build a new campus in a city, say Austin. There's usually other trade schools there.
Yeah.
Say they've been there 30, 40 years. When we come in, now we're close to 1,000 students in our Austin building. They're all doing many more students than they were doing before. Why is that? You would think if a competitor came in, that guy would be losing students.
Yeah.
No, he's got 150 more than when we got there. Why? Because we brought the awareness to the market that this all exists. So many people just say to themselves, I didn't know you could do this. We take our kids to, we have industry nights for high school students, and we'll take a busload of them to a Porsche dealership with their parents. And they can talk to Porsche technicians who came through our Porsche program or something along those lines. And you've got a 22-year-old who thought he was going to be driving Uber. Thought that his life was maybe working in a warehouse, wasn't going to go to college, is now a Porsche tech that's 22 years old, making upwards of $100,000 a year when he never thought anything like that would happen. That's how mind share starts to change with parents.
It really is opening up the eyes of both the parent as well as their child, and of course, in your case, the student. So you mentioned earlier in our conversation the North Star strategy, and this is something that was implemented not long after you became CEO. Can you just first, before we get into it, define the North Star internally, and how are you putting its core principles into action to reach the desired goals?
Yeah, well, there are 3 core principles to the North Star strategy. We put it into place, devised it in 2019 when I took over, put it into place in 2020 after we went out into the market and raised $50 million to launch the strategy. And there are 3 basic principles: growth, diversification, and optimization. Right. And it's a very simple strategy at the core, not necessarily simple to execute on. When we talk about growth, we talk about more campuses, more geography, getting to more students, right? When we talk about diversification, we talk about more skills. UTI for many years was really just auto diesel. And now UTI is auto, diesel, motorcycle, marine, aviation, welding, electrician training, as well as renewable energy and HVAC. So what we really now have diversified into a tech center. We talk to about 500,000 18 to 24-year-olds a year. Some of them just don't want to fix cars. They want to go out and they want to fix something, or they want to operate something. They want to weld. They want to do that. And so we diversified the population. And then optimization really has to do with both the way we teach and the way we think about our locations, right? For many, many years, we didn't think about, are we optimizing our locations so we can get the maximum number of programs on it? Which is that stuff spread around, right? And on it. Are we teaching using the latest technologies? Right now, 50% of our curriculum is online. And you may scratch your head and say, well, wait, how do you become an auto technician online? Well, remember, inside of that car is a server. Inside of that car is electronics. Inside of that car is a computer. And so there's a number of courses. About half the courses are non-hands-on courses. They're computer science, there's strength of materials, there's basic engineering courses, et cetera, where you need to understand all of that stuff before we let you put your fingers in there. And so 50% of the curriculum is now online, which liberated us to have more room on our campus and more time to teach other things. And so that's an example of optimization. So growth, diversification, and optimization. The first 5 years were really about getting ourselves set up and getting a diversified portfolio. We acquired MIAT, College of Technology. They brought us aviation. They brought us HVAC, renewable energy, a number of things that we can now proliferate onto the UTI campuses. And then the second move was buying Concord Career Colleges, which took us into healthcare. And so a company that was 10 campuses and about 8,000 students is now 32 campuses, approaching 30,000 students, and servicing a much broader audience in these areas. And so that was the first 5 years of the strategy. The next 5 years of a strategy is really a continuation and with an accelerated view on getting to more locations and getting more programs out in front of people, right? We've set it up, set the base, got the assets in place, and now what we're doing is really moving to accelerate that growth.
And you mentioned the acquisition of Concord Career Colleges. That happened in about December of 2022, or closed in December of 2022. Just what was the strategic rationale? Because that is a stark sort of shift from what UTI was originally known for, going from, again, originally the automotive industry, right, 60 years ago, to, again, staying relatively within the skilled trades arena, but then shifting to healthcare, or at least adding healthcare to your portfolio. What was the rationale behind that move?
So the thing that binds these two businesses is the fundamental notion of the supply and demand curve. As I said, there's 4 or 5 jobs for every graduate from from everything we teach at UTI. And frankly, we won't enter areas where there isn't a supply and demand curve issue. So, but on the healthcare side, it's 5 to 10 jobs for every graduate. And so the rationale is, one, both of them are alternatives to a 4-year education. And 2, the supply and demand curve is as acute, if not more acute, on the healthcare side. It also sort of diversifies our student set. And the UTI side is really an 18 to 24-year-old. It had been primarily males, although we're working very, very hard to bring more women into the trades. Concord is 25 to 35-year-old, primarily women. And so we also wanted to diversify our student body so that we had a broader audience for which to talk to. But what really unifies them is this need to close the gap.
So, Jerome, with multiple subsidiaries, campuses across the country, students pursuing diverse career paths, how do you ensure alignment with the North Star strategy and measure whether it's driving those desired, meaningful outcomes for all stakeholders?
You were at the New York Stock Exchange. You can talk about numbers like stock prices and revenue and EBITDA and all of the numbers that drive the financial community. And, the way I look at that is those numbers sustain us. They don't define us. The definition of what we do is really about student success. Right? Over 70% of the students graduate in their allotted time. If you look at community colleges, that number is more in the 30% range. Right? So having a high quality educational process that matriculates that many students is something that we're very proud of. 85% or more of our students get job in market within 1 year. Right? And then the final statistic is really our employer satisfaction. Our employer satisfaction numbers are between 95 and 100%. Those barometers we want to keep up there no matter what we do in terms of it. And why? Because, we were just celebrating our 60th today, ringing the bell, had a lot of our partners there. And I would ask some of our employment partners, so why do you hire our people? And they say, you have the highest quality graduate by far. They're the most industry ready. They're the most industry aligned. So that's really what defines us, both on the Concord side and on the UTI side.
And so we've talked a lot about growth, the different acquisitions that UTI has made, obviously growth being one of the pillars of the North Star strategy. What does growth look like for UTI when we're looking over the next decade, over the next 15 years? You said before that, we could open up 12 new campuses, but we'd rather open up 2 new campuses each year to maintain that high standard of quality. So what does that growth look like in the years moving forward?
Well, we did say we're going to open a minimum of 2 new campuses a year. And part of it is sort of conditioning both divisions to get the bandwidth and the focus to do it. We know we can open 2 new UTI campuses a year. We've done it successfully in the past. We'll do it in the future. We know we can launch somewhere around, between a half a dozen and 10 new programs across the UTI and do it at that successful rate and have the high outcomes. Concord is new to us, right? They haven't opened many campuses over the last 5 years. And so we're just getting to know each other in terms of bandwidth and capabilities. That may give us some upside to the plan. But what we've said is we'll open 2 new campuses a year minimum. We're doing 3 next year. We'll open 6 new programs a year minimum. We're doing 9 this year. And that will happen for the next 5 years, which gets us to the target we set, which is a company that's somewhere about $1.1, $1.2 billion and approaching 20% EBITDA.
So earlier, we obviously touched on 2025 being a milestone year as UTI celebrates 60 years since its founding. And while the company has evolved far beyond its original automotive focus with, as you said at the beginning, 5 students in one classroom, I feel like its core mission to put students on a path to success has remained throughout those 6 decades. So as you reflect on them and the impact that UTI has had, what message would you want to share with young people and their families really about the values and the opportunities that careers in skilled trades and healthcare could provide today?
Yeah, what I'd say is this is not only a job, it's actually a mission, right? Is that keeping trucks on the road so people get food, keeping ambulances on the road so people can get to the hospital, having the staff waiting for them there at the hospital, that they're not waiting in line in a waiting room to be able to get their blood taken or get their x-rays taken or an MRI, or surgical techs and nurses and the things that we do. When you're go to a dentist, you need your teeth examined and you need your x-rays, et cetera. Having that there is not just a job. It's not just a way to make money. You're really contributing, right?
As we now begin to wrap up our conversation, you've obviously led significant transformation at UTI since becoming CEO in 2019. Now looking ahead, and I asked before how or what growth looks like in the next 5 to 10 years, but just how are you and your leadership team planning to build on the progress that you've already made over the last 5 years, last 6 years now, and shape the company's future, moving forward so that when we get to 120 years and then 180 years, UTI is still strong and thriving?
Well, we're working very hard not just to build the front end, meaning new campuses, new programs, more students, et cetera, but we're also working to fortify the platform. And we've made some additions to our leadership team. Adrienne Detrey just joined us as CIO. Her job is to help us create a platform on which we can grow at a faster pace, whether it's our ERP system, our learning management, our student information, or our CRM. Those platforms across the division will fuel us going forward. We've been doing these acquisitions, but not really talking about how they work together. Are there functions that can work together to create a more durable platform for us to move forward? So yes, we've got our eyes set on being able to open at least 2 new campuses, 6, 8, 9, 10 new programs a year. But we're also doing the hard work underneath it to make sure that the company and the platform and the operating model is set so that we can continue to repeat down that path.
Well, Jerome, I appreciate you speaking with me here at the NYSE, and thanks so much for joining us inside the Ice House.
Hey, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.